Good morning. Um, First, full disclosure, Richard Feldman said he looked at the resumes of everybody in this room and was pleased to be here. I am thoroughly daunted. I am not a scientist. I'm not an academic. I'm not a researcher. I'm not even a policy wonk. I'm an advocate for gun safety and gun violence prevention. Not against gun ownership, not against guns. I come from the world of advertising, marketing, and that's the perspective that I've brought to this since my brother was shot in 1997 in a shooting that happened on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. And one of the most striking things when I first got involved in this issue was the disconnect between what the advocates are talking about and what the researchers are doing. And I think a lot of that fault is on the side of the advocates who just rush to advocate around solutions when there's a major tragedy that happens and it's not based necessarily in the greatest opportunity actually to do what we're advocating, which is prevent gun violence, save lives, prevent people from getting shot. So my goal here today is to hopefully close some of that disconnect through the lens of talking about what it is that Brady, the Brady campaign, does advocate, and where research and closing those gaps could help a lot. And I'm going to deal with that instruction of 3 recommendations by dividing it into the 3 categories where Brady worked, and then I'll lay a 4th bonus one on you at the end too. So, coming out of the president's recommendation and, big strategic planning that our organization did when I got here, we really consider Brady taking a comprehensive approach to the issue of gun violence through 3 key areas. One is the role of policy, which we believe is primarily about greatest opportunities keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and quote unquote dangerous people. How you define them is a question. The role of public health and safety education, reducing the risk of whether it's 300 million or not, it's a lot of guns already in circulation, which we have to acknowledge are mostly in the hands of decent law-abiding citizens, doing that through changing social norms. And then our legal action project, keeping guns out of the hands of criminals by bringing cases against irresponsible gun sellers, again, recognizing that the majority of them aren't, and defending the constitutionality of laws that we can demonstrate are effective, and inspiring safer behavior by bringing cases against irresponsible gun owners kind of in that area of changing social norms. Again, the case for interventions we firmly believe and feel it's been under-recognized should be based in data. And to do that, we've started to take this approach of looking at, you hear the term epidemiology a lot, what we're starting to label the pathology of guns to gun violence. We talked about the analogy of, you have to look at the role of drugs to look at to look at the role to look at the impact on gun violence. You also have to look at the role of guns, and that's what we're doing. And that does reveal some key data gaps that, gosh, I wish I had answered when we were going through this last round of advocating around a policy solution in some areas of potential focus. So here's a pretty simple outline of that pathology model, and it is surprisingly simple to a lot of people who aren't very close to this issue. Basically, and there's some assumptions made here, and so don't hate me for this, because again, I gave you that caveat in the beginning, I'm not a scientist. But virtually every gun, and it's very unlike drugs, starts out legal. There isn't, the guns are smuggled out of this country, not into this country, sold through a federally licensed firearm dealer, and somewhere along the way, they cause about 30,000 gun deaths a year and about 70,000 or more injuries. And by the way, any number that I give here could be considered an area for further research where there's any question or uncertainty, because these are the important numbers here, and then you'll see there's some places where I actually don't give numbers. When you look at it just that next level of complexity, basically they go through 2 paths. Either they are in the hands of criminals or they're in the hands of law-abiding citizens with lawful intent, about 300 million guns, again, causing the impact that we talked about. How do they get into those hands? Again, surprisingly simple. For the most part, for the overwhelming majority of it, it's either, for the top half of that, criminals and illegal guns, it's through straw purchases, trafficking, from federally licensed firearm dealers, where people can pass a background check and are still able to buy guns and then in turn sell them to criminals, or through private sales without background checks. And that's that, whether it's 40%, or not, is something that should be examined. And then for law-abiding citizens, either it's private sales without background checks or direct from a federally licensed firearm dealer. It's the same way. About 40%, that number about should be on there as a maybe more of a question mark than an exclamation point, and it's something that should be that should be examined. We're aware of that old data. We also felt very comfortable advocating around the importance of background checks. You just can look at armslist.com and see that there's 73,000 guns that are for sale today. 94% of them, that's empirical, don't require background checks. So whether it's 40% or not, it's a big issue that people can very easily buy guns without background checks. But it is important to get more information around that. And yes, 200,000 to 500,000 guns are stolen per year in the US. And that's a big way that guns get into the hands of criminals from people who did buy them with lawful intent. And as it relates to straw purchasers, and again, to the extent that these numbers can be improved, something to consider, but the studies that I've seen show that about 1% of irresponsible dealers are responsible for 60% of guns that are recovered in crimes. Then you look at the type of death that these guns cause, and again, areas for potential examination. When you're talking about criminal ownership of guns, illegal guns, you're obviously talking about homicide and crime related to violence. Big question, and surprisingly unexamined. How many deaths do those guns cause? If we're going to talk about how we can prevent gun violence by keeping guns out of those hands, we should know how many deaths are caused by the guns that wind up in the hands of criminals. We do know that it's disproportionately urban and disproportionately young. And then if you look at the bottom half of that model from law-abiding citizens, the first thing that strikes you is, just because of the impact, just because of the impact of suicide alone, you're dealing in all likelihood with the majority of gun violence is caused by guns that are in the hands of law-abiding citizens for lawful intent. You're dealing with, maybe an estimate is 20 to 25,000 gun deaths per year. You're talking about disproportionately rural and places where there are higher rates of gun ownership. That's an undeniable correlation. The places with the higher rates of gun ownership have higher rates of suicide, for example. But learning more about that is very important to make the case around the interventions that could have the greatest impact. And these arrows here are meant to be roughly proportional. Suicide is the lion's share, then homicide and domestic violence, crimes of passion as an example. And unintentional shootings is significant. There have been interesting studies that have shown probably more significant than people acknowledge because of the way coroners, medical examiners classify unintentional shootings, but it is smaller than homicide and suicide. All right, so now we look at those three areas of intervention that Brady advocates around. First, policy, keeping guns out of the hands of criminals and out of quote-unquote dangerous hands. Universal background checks and effective anti-trafficking. You can see here the impact that has the potential to have in interrupting that pathology from federally licensed firearm dealers to whatever that number is of deaths that gun causes every year. we feel comfortable, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room wouldn't. And this is kind of one of the answers that we need to get get a fine point around this, saying that these, just looking at it through the lens of this model, that these interventions should have the potential to save hundreds of thousands of lives per year if 40% of gun sales go through private sales. If the Brady law has already prevented 2 million prohibited purchasers from getting guns, and that only applies to 60% of gun sales, or only a portion of gun sales. It's pretty easy to make that leap. It would be a lot easier to make that leap if we had the data around it. And we certainly would strongly advocate what Philip Cook was advocating around learning more about background checks, and then also how to successfully approach trafficking and straw purchasers. This last go round was kind of the crime and punishment route of making it a crime or more of a crime. It's also important to look at one handgun a month laws and the impact that had, and there are interesting opportunities to do studies around that. When it was passed in Virginia, what were the number of crime guns that were recovered in New York? And there hasn't been a lot of recent research on that. And then the impact of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines is vitally important to look at. It's important to look at and be realistic about what is the impact that has. It's not clicking. There we go. Public health and safety campaigns. That's a delta triangle for change. That's not a slash through it. We don't want to cut off gun ownership by law-abiding citizens. We want to change social norms. We want to have an honest conversation about the risks associated with gun ownership, like we do about other issues, like we did about AIDS and sex, like friends don't let friends drive drunk, secondhand smoke. What are the programs that we can put out there to actually change those social norms? I'll just move quickly through this, and I'll make all of this available to everyone in the room. And then legal action we talked about in terms of bringing criminal cases against irresponsible gun sellers, and encouraging safer behavior. Again, more of that delta change than cutting it off. And then a quick addendum on technology. I think our friend Steve Terrett is going to talk about this later, but I just want to acknowledge it's outside of Brady's core mission, but that could go a long way, we believe, to keeping guns out of the hands of criminals by rendering stolen guns useless and making the 300 million guns already in circulation safer. And you can see where that impacts this, and that's that's probably the biggest opportunity to put that slash over stolen guns. And then, again, I'll make this available, but this basically defines what we see as the opportunity and kind of, the recommendations we would lay out in terms of the areas that are most worthwhile exploring in the pursuit of solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to come back to Keith Hoddle, and we'll turn now to John Fraser, Director of the NRA ILA Research and Information Division.